Let's say you're making an API call in your Jetpack Compose app, but then you're so lazy or you're so dumb that all you're doing is making a network package and creating Mars API servers, whatever type of service you're making, and then you do all this, and then you make a singleton object, which is all right in my opinion, but apparently it's not according to Google. So this is how you create a repository from this. So all we're doing here is just in the view model so far, we have Mars API retrofit.service.getPhotos, which is this is the object. So we're basically calling this object that we already instantiated here, and then we're calling retrofit service and the getPhotos function, which will return a list of Mars photo, and then it will just show how much we have. So the goal is to change this code and have the same result here. All right, so we have the API call here in Mars API service, and now we want to change it to become behind a repository. First things first, we make a new package called the data package, and in the data package we want to make the Mars Photos repository itself, and we make this an interface first. And what we want this interface in the end for this Mars Photos repository, not only a network version, maybe an offline version, testing version as well, but both versions will have a suspend function, which is called getPhotos, and it returns a list of Mars photo, right? Like in our original thing. And then we want to implement this interface by calling class, and then we want to make a network version. So network Mars Photos repository, extending Mars Photos repository. In this class, we want to override this suspending function, and for right now we just want to return the Mars API service, or Mars API.retrofit service.getPhotos, just to see if this works in the first place. So we go back to view model, and then we make a new, we instantiate this object that we already made, instantiate the class, so Mars Photos repository is network Mars Photos repository, and then we want to call this Mars Photos repository.getPhotos. So we made this class network Mars repository, which implements the interface of Mars Photos repository, and it overrides the function by returning Mars API service.retrofit.service. So we're still using the singleton object. We're calling from here basically, except it's going through a repository, and in the view model we're communicating through to the interface of the repository by instantiating the repository itself and then calling it. So we should get the same result here, calling the function. And this is still not good since we're still using the singleton object and we're not using dependency injection in the view model. So the goal is to basically make the view model testable with a free API or a testing API. So here we have a success again, which makes pretty much sense since we just did nothing except looping this, routing this through a repository, and we're accessing the repository here, the interface, which is the repository in the view model. So now what we want to do is actually use dependency injection, so that it's just a better way to make our view model testable. And so the way we do that is by creating a container, so app container, which is an interface, and in this container we will have the value of Mars Photos repository, which will be of type Mars Photos repository, and we want to make a default app container which extends the app container interface. And here in this default app container, we basically want everything we have over in the Mars API service. So we have the Mars API service here. We have the base URL, retrofit builder. We're building the retrofit, and then we have retrofit service create, which is an expensive call actually. And then we want to basically make a network photos repository using this service right in our app container. So in this app container, let's just copy this base URL, delete the const word because it's not a constant anymore. Change this to camel case, and then we're gonna copy this code over here, and then we're gonna change this to base URL, and then we want to copy this code right here again, and now we want to use retrofit.create Mars API service class Java. And this is still an error because we haven't overridden the value in our interface. So that's the thing we're about to do right now, is override MarsPhotos repository by lazy. We want to lazy instantiate a network MarsPhotos repository followed by the retrofit service. So retro. But you'll notice that there's an error now since we don't actually have a parameter in our network MarsPhotos repository. So we want to add a parameter here, private val MarsPhotos repository, and we want to call, and we want to hold on, it should be MarsPhotos. We want to call this one, instead of Mars API, the singleton object, we want to actually call the Mars, oh, it should be Mars API service, sorry, Mars API service, and then it should call that Mars API service that we pass into this MarsPhotos repository. The error is gone now, and now we have the app container. Now we actually want to implement the app container in our app. So the way we do that is through creating a new application. So we call this MarsPhotos application in our root folder, by the way. This is class, and this should extend the application. Let's just import this real quick. And over here, we want to override the onCreate function and actually have a container equal to a default app container. And we'll latent it this far, so container, which is app container. So once the onCreate function is called, and then we initialize this container variable with default app container, and default app container is all this junk. This is the default app container, or a series of variables that we use across the application. So it's like a global variable basically, yeah. And now we have this, and now we want to actually use it in our view model, right? So to use it in our view model, we can just this is where the principle of dependency injection comes in, where we use a private val. We're going to make a new parameter here called MarsPhotos repository. So we're going to pass the MarsPhotos repository into the view model. We're going to initialize it somewhere else, or instantiate an object of this repository somewhere else. We're going to pass it into Mars view model, which is called, that phenomena is called dependency injection. And we want to actually use this MarsPhotos repository, which holds the function of get photos. And we're going to call that and replace that here. So we want to delete this line of code, and since we already have MarsPhotos repository.getPhotos, it's just done. And now for the factory object, we want to make a companion object. So companion object val factory is of type view model provider.factory, and is equal to, let's look at the boilerplate. This is some boilerplate code here. View model factory initializer file application is equal to this, and then there's a dictionary, so application underscore key as MarsPhotos application, and then we want to pass this into Mars view model with MarsPhotos repository is equal to application.container.MarsPhotos repository. We're gonna import that with Alt Enter. And don't forget, in Android manifest.xml, we want to add this app MarsPhotos application. And so we're good to go now. We have the companion object, everything ready. And now to actually use this in our view model, I mean our app, we need to pass in this. So go factory is equal to view Mars view model dot factory, and that's equal to this right here, the Mars view model there, right there. So we have a companion object right there, and we should run the app and it should be good to go. We didn't mess anything up. Some useless imports here, let's just get rid of them. Let's check. Should be good to go. I'm not sure though. Alright, so it works. Alright, thank you for watching.